Welcome to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. Coming up on today's show, with a general election just a few months away, a leading Conservative politician has called on British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak to resign, as polls show the party heading towards a heavy defeat at the ballot box. It is now rumoured that some of Sunak's closest allies are also working to oust the Prime Minister. And our Downing Street correspondent will shortly be joining me for the latest. And the US Secretary of State has highlighted Washington's support across several sectors in Nigeria during his visit to Lagos and Abuja earlier this week. Will Anthony Blinkens' charm strategy pay off? That's what I'll be asking Uber Michael, the founder and chairman of Ubercool Group, who'll be joining me from the Federal Capital Territory, and Siddhartha Jha, the founding partner of Declimate, who'll be joining me shortly from New York City. Then later, on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum's annual meetings in Davos, Switzerland, the Africa Collective convened a gathering of global leaders in business and government to discuss investment into the continent. I was there, and I'll be bringing you those interviews shortly. But first, let's begin the show by taking a look at what's been trending on social media platforms this week. And we begin with LinkedIn. The business advocacy group Enterprise NGR joins the chorus of celebrations for Adebayo Ogunlesi, the banker who shook up Wall Street early this month by selling his infrastructure investment firm Global Infrastructure Partners to BlackRock Inc. for $12.5 billion US. The announced acquisition of the $100 billion asset management firm spiked Ogunlesi's net worth to an estimated $2.3 billion. Enterprise NGR asked their followers to join them in celebrating Ogunlesi's impactful journey and unwavering commitment to excellence. And on X, Bloomberg suggests that British men are working shorter hours on average than they did 25 years ago. The Post goes on to say that according to analysis from the Office for National Statistics, women are picking up the slack and are having to work much harder in the workplace. Then finally, this from Save Our Planet on Facebook. Earlier this month, US President Joe Biden exercised his veto power to block a Republican-led resolution aimed at impeding the administration's plans to allocate $7.5 billion for the construction of electric vehicle charging stations across America. The Post suggests the White House is scrambling to ensure electric vehicle adoption doesn't lose its charge amid signs of slowing momentum. Rishi Sunak's former advisor, who quit last year, is now working with a group of MPs plotting to oust the embattled Prime Minister. The rebel group is rumoured to be working with around 10 Tory MPs, including Suella Braverman, the former Home Secretary. The development follows an open letter published on Tuesday by Conservative MP Simon Clarke. Clarke described Sunak's leadership as uninspiring and called for the Prime Minister to step down. Well, for more on this, I was earlier joined in the studio by our Downing Street correspondent, Simon Pusey. Simon, it's nice to be back in the warm studio with you. It's been a difficult week for the Prime Minister, as it usually is, but this week really tough because one of his own MPs stuck the knife in his back publicly. Talks of a potential plot from some of his own allies to get him out. Lots of people saying typical Tories putting party before country. What's been going on?
I think when we talk about a bad week, we've got to try and put it in context with where the Conservative Party is and look back to maybe the end of sort of final days of Gordon Brown with Labour, when a party's been in for 14 years now, as the Conservatives have. A bad week, I think, is, the Prime Minister being toppled. I think a good week is him not being toppled, because we're in those final stages now, and the country just wants a change. And I remember reading somewhere someone saying, the Conservatives need to give the people what they want, or they are going to face annihilation at the election.
Possible.
And then he continued, unfortunately, what the people want is the Conservatives to be annihilated at the next election. I think there's just this sort of fever in the country that there needs to be change. And so really, whatever anyone does, it doesn't matter whether it's Rishi Sunak or anyone else as Prime Minister. And we've said time and time again before on this programme how hard it is to keep this party together when there are so many different factions. I can't even remember the number of what's the latest one. It's Popular Conservatives, Popcon, or it's just insane now how many different groups there are just within one party. So there's this guy Simon Clarke has come out, and who used to work at the Treasury with Rishi Sunak.
So he knows him. Would we say he's an ally?
I'd say he used to be an ally for sure. And he's come out and said,
not the man.
He said, no one likes the person who shouts iceberg, but I'd rather us not hit the iceberg. The problem is they're going to hit the iceberg. It doesn't matter what they do, and I think people like him are saying, well, we can lose at the election, but we don't have to go so badly. But everyone has a different idea within the Conservative Party about which direction they should be going in.
Apparently he's being bullied, Simon, that he can't stand up to them. Do you think there's any truth to that?
Well, he certainly, he doesn't fire anyone, really. They leave, don't they? So we saw the deputy chairman, Lee Anderson, he left, having sort of caused, done what he wanted, and everyone was saying, oh, he's going to be sacked, and actually he left in the end himself. I don't think Rishi is that sort of strict, or he doesn't quite have the Boris Johnson where he would just fire a whole swathe of people who voted against him.
Yeah.
To be fair to Rishi, though, he's stared down some of these rebellions, right? He hasn't lost any of these votes. A lot of people say, oh, we're going to, they might potentially lose, and then whatever the bill is passes, hugely.
House of Lords?
Yeah, I mean, who
that
knows?
Was expected.
I mean, exactly. Yeah. So I think Rishi Sunak is going to do, as he always has done since he's become Prime Minister, his best, try and keep the party together. I just don't think there's another point that I think is a positive for him is that there's no obvious candidate to take over. There's no one that's going to unify the Conservative Party at all because it's completely splintered and broken. I think he's the best of a bad bunch in terms of keeping that together, and I don't think most Conservatives would think, oh, there's a leading light that can take us into the next election.
Apparently there's more names could come out publicly, big names. What do you think?
Well, I mean, that remains to be seen. I think Simon Clarke, he kind of nailed his colours to the mast and expected a couple of people to follow him, and no one did. No. The biggest rebellion that we saw was only 11 people voting against the government. So in terms of if you're looking back at those sort of Gordon Brown years when there were, and so many other examples,
and Boris Johnson.
Right, this is not anywhere close to that. So I think just every week when there's going to be more of these things, and the Telegraph is very much against Rishi Sunak now. The Telegraph is obviously the Conservative leading paper. Every day you see editorials slagging him off.
So sponsored.
Really? Well, yeah, and so you never know really, but I don't see us sitting here in 1, 2, 3 weeks' time talking about why Rishi Sunak's gone. I don't think that's going to happen because there's no obvious person.
So the countdown continues. Thanks, Simon. The US Secretary of State has voiced hope for greater investments into Nigeria during a meeting with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Abuja this week. Blinken also toured Lagos State, where he visited a complex of IT startups. In 2022, America provided nearly $1.2 billion in foreign assistance resources to Nigeria, supporting economic development, education, democracy, health, energy and climate, humanitarian relief, security and more. Two-way trade between both countries exceeded $10.6 billion that year. Well, for more on this, I'm now being joined by Siddhartha Jha, the founding partner of D-Climate. Siddhartha joins me from New York City. Siddhartha Jha, thank you so much for joining me on Channel's Business Global. I think a lot of us were pleasantly surprised at Anthony Blinken's visit to Nigeria. It's always been a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to America and the continent. I think it's fair to say they've been a little bit behind the curve, but he voiced hope for greater US investments into Nigeria. But he did call on Nigeria and, of course, the president in particular, Bola Ahmed Tinubu, to reassure investors. Do you think finally, perhaps, we can move beyond risk when we're talking about investment in Africa, or is that still a huge issue?
While it has been an issue historically, and risk is always a part of any geography, I think we're finding that around the world, like we have to be cognizant of risk. I think what's changing in Africa very rapidly is the opportunity set has grown tremendously. If you look at any of the major sectors, from agriculture to energy to transportation, mobile pay, there's a burgeoning of technology happening across the continent with entrepreneurs working with larger companies to bring about change. And the local populations are embracing technology in a way that I think is going to bring huge changes over the coming decades. And of course, we always talk about the demographic tailwind that Africa has. And the time, if we focus too much on risk, we will miss the great opportunity that Africa has in terms of taking its demographic advantages and leaping ahead in terms of utilization of technology and efficiency across the vast array of sectors that need it right now.
Siddhartha, you do a lot of work in Africa with tech startups. Talk to me about the tech ecosystem. What is unique about tech entrepreneurs in Africa?
Yeah, I mean, Africa has an amazing tech scene that is growing so fast, and the diversity of the continent, really brings about different talent bases, different talent pools. Going to Nairobi, you have Cape Town, you have Lagos, you have Addis, and many other cities that are burgeoning, their own Silicon Valleys in many ways. I think what's unique is that when tech originates from your local area, it is truly geared to what the people need, right? Tech in the Western context may not be directly applicable in Africa. It needs to be tailored in terms of cost, in terms of functionality, for what the constraints and opportunities are locally.
Siddhartha Jha, founding partner of Declimate, thank you so much for your time and expertise today. Let's remain with this topic, assessing Anthony Blinkens' meeting with President Bola Ahmed Tinubu in Abuja this week. And to do this, I'm now being joined by Uber Michael, the founder and chairman of Ubaku Group. Uber joins me from the Federal Capital Territory. Uber Michael, it's a pleasure having you on Channel's Business Global. So the Secretary of State had some positive words, I've got to say, about Nigeria. To quote a direct quote from him, he said that America has a growing interest in the country, in working with Nigeria, investing in Nigeria, and partnering with Nigeria. That's quite a statement.
Yes, of course, they have interest in Nigeria. They have interest in Africa. And if you have interest in Africa, he said it at the State House, that Nigeria, they confirmed that Nigeria is the Africa's largest economic hub. And you cannot do anything in Africa without Nigeria. You cannot avoid Nigeria. We are not just a player in Africa, but a major player in the world. And since 1960, the U.S. has had business relationship with Nigeria. So it has been there. And you find out that they are very interested in Nigeria because there's been a void between these Nigeria and U.S. business relations. That's because over the years, Nigeria particularly has felt like, we've been neglected in so many areas. When you look at the numbers, look at what we do with the U.S., you find out that the basic things that we do with the U.S. is probably raw materials. The export to U.S. is basically raw materials, from cocoa to cotton to crude oil to leather and live animals. When you look at the import, the export from U.S. to Nigeria, you find out that it's electric cars, pharmaceuticals, ammunitions, aircraft. Looking at this, you find out that Nigeria over the years has been, this a destination for raw materials. But they have to look at Nigeria differently, because you find out that the Chinese are in town. The Chinese are doing way better than them. Nigeria is not the Nigeria of the 1960s. A lot of things have changed. We have a new president. Our country is better. And, they know that over the years, even if it's slow, there has been an increase in the business. Like I said earlier, about 0.8% annual growth in the export trade with the U.S. But looking at what we give, when you look at the export from Nigeria to the U.S., it has been decreasing annually at the rate of 0.6. So there has been a steady decline of what we do with them, but there has been an increase in what they do with us. So we do more business with them than they do with us. So I think they really need to look at that.
There's so much work to be done, but at least we're on the way there, aren't we? Honourable Uber Michael, who is the CEO of the Ubaku Group, Thank you so much for your time and expertise today. Coming up on Channel's Business Global, on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum's annual meetings in Davos, Switzerland, the Africa Collective convened a gathering of global leaders in business and government to discuss investment into the continent. I was there and I'll be bringing you those interviews shortly. And as always, I'll be looking back at some of the biggest business news stories of the week. All of this after the break. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Channel's Business Global with me, Juliana Olayinka, from our studios here in London. In a moment, I'll be sharing some of the interviews I conducted at an African-themed event in Davos last week. But until then, here's a breakdown of some of the biggest business news stories of the week. Russia has surpassed Saudi Arabia to become China's largest oil supplier. According to the latest Chinese customs data, the world's largest crude buyer imported a record amount of bargain-priced Russian oil last year, taking advantage of Moscow's desperate search for new buyers amid Western sanctions following the Kremlin's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The fallout from the war between Israel and Hamas in next-door Gaza is adding to the economic woes of Egypt. As the International Monetary Fund met Egyptian officials in Cairo for ongoing discussions over the first and second reviews of the country's reform program, the local currency is plunging on the black market and is now more than 50% weaker than its official rate. Reeling from its worst economic crisis in decades, Egypt has already devalued the pound 3 times. This week, a government spokesperson ruled out another currency devaluation against the US dollar. Rio Tinto has confirmed that a number of its staff travelling to the company's diamond mining site in Canada died in a fatal plane crash. In a statement released early Wednesday morning, the mining giant said it is working closely with authorities to find out exactly what happened. Rio has been operating Diavik, the biggest diamond mine in Canada, since it started production in 2003. The firm's chief executive, Jacob Stolsham, said that the company was absolutely devastated by the crash. Now to my final topic. In partnership with the Secretariat of the African Continental Free Trade Area, the Africa Collective hosted a series of events on the sidelines of the World Economic Forum's annual meetings to boost the overall presence of Africa-related topics on the global stage. Under the theme, Unleashing Potential, Africa's Place in Attracting Future Allocation of Capital Pools, the group convened a gathering of global leaders in business and government to discuss investment into the continent.
I dedicated myself to Africa, specifically East Africa, about 4 years back. I had no experience in sub-Saharan Africa in general. The reason I did this is because I believe Africa is becoming a mega trend as an investment jurisdiction, as a geography. The fundamentals cannot be ignored. Young population, the demographic effects, the affinity to technology, the fact that it's greenfield, that it's more flexible regulation. You can still be entrepreneurial on the continent, and there's a lot of room to grow. This is the only Africa event I also saw, so I decided to come here very early. I left my home at 3:30 in the morning to come here right on time. Again, there's no logistics into Davos to get here on time, so I had to find my way with the car. But I think it's worth coming here. There's very interesting profiles also that we're on stage. You get experiences from across the continent that's rare in like one place. With regards to the gender diversity, I fully agree. I have 2 young daughters, and I try to embrace diversity also in our company. As a matter of fact, we have a mandate that we fund SME entrepreneurs, so 50-50. We are aiming to have 50% women-led entrepreneurs that are receiving funding from us. We have not quite hit it this year, to be honest. We were at 40%, but it's not really a bias, but more organically generated. And I think it's a reflection of the SME segment across East Africa, that a lot of these businesses that are deserving credit are actually led by women. That's a strong signal.
We want to tell the world that Nigeria is open for business. The administration of President Bola Ahmed Tinubu has made it very clear that Nigeria is open for business. Now, for us to be open for business, we need to identify where business is done, where those deals are done, where the people that we want as our partners meet, what they discuss, what issues they focus on, and what is it that they look for when they seek destinations for their investments. And so for us, yes, it may have had that demographics before, but we need to be a part of that, because that's really a lot of the capital, global capital, is in the hands of those who come to Davos. So if we're seeking investment capital to come into our shores, we need to go to where the people that manage and own that capital, congregate and have conversations with them. Because at the end of the day, it is about a relationship, right? It is about understanding one another. It is about being comfortable that this is where I want to put my money. You're not going to put your money where you don't know. You're not going to put your money in the hands of people you don't have relationships with. We need to build those relationships. We need to reach out. And I think Davos is one of those places to begin to do that.
I think there are lots of great things happening across Africa, in Nigeria, and bringing those narratives together for a global audience was important. Africa Collective is an initiative that brings great initiatives out of Africa for the global stage. And I think that's why it was very important to showcase what we are doing and how we can partner with the global investments. This gathering is a gathering of a selective sort of audience, and there is lots happening across the world. So when a large number of people who don't participate in this sort of gathering have to put out their comments, and I think that's where the negativity comes out. This is my first time participating at the Davos, but I would like to highlight this is a great stage for you to participate and highlight what you or your company or your geography or your government is doing in that space, and how you can scale, how you can build global partnerships. So outside of the negativity, I still feel this is a amazing place for you to network and build a sustainable long-term perspective.
We have, I think, quite a unique experience of investing in Africa. We invested in funds, deploying capital across the continent. We're deploying directly into companies ourselves. So I think getting that story out, I think, is going to help with what we're trying to do. We're obviously trying to grow our business, but I think just grow our understanding of the opportunity, one that we think is quite material. There's a perception about what's going on in Africa, how investable Africa is, or more, I guess, more directly, how not investable Africa is. So I think unless you get participants like myself, with the sort of stuff we do and other businesses, unless you get those kind of stories out so people can see the reality, people like us who can speak to the challenges but also the opportunity, businesses that have been on the continent for decades doing extremely well, unless you get that message out, the narrative's not going to change. So I guess that's really the point, changing the narrative.
Let's take our music industry, for instance. Okay, our creative sector is doing fantastically well. It's perhaps one of our best exports. There is hardly any city in the world or any radio station in any country in the world that doesn't play Nigerian music. You go to Spotify, the volume of Nigerian music that is being streamed is indicative of the hunger, the thirst of the beautiful creatives that comes out of Nigeria. That's brand Nigeria. That's the reality of what you call brand Nigeria. Okay? If you look at our diaspora, Nigerian diasporans are doing fantastic things around the world, running great institutions, mobilizing large volumes of capital. There's hardly any major city or any major business where you don't have Nigerian diasporans involved with at the very highest level. So brand Nigeria is alive. It's from the experience. Of course, there's a lot more we need to do. We need to understand the mindset of those that may have that negative connotation and engage them. We need to reach out. We need to communicate. We need to build bridges. We need to build partnerships so that people begin to know Nigeria, not just from rhetorics or adverts, but from the experience of Nigerians. Because we Nigerians represent a brand. We are the epitome of brand Nigeria. And how we conduct ourselves, how we conduct business, how we communicate, how we reach out to people would determine the brand value of Nigeria. And I believe that we have what it takes to rebuild brand Nigeria.
Well, sadly, that's all we have time for today. But as always, do get in touch with your comments and suggestions. I'll see you at the same time next week for more in-depth business analysis on Channel's Business Global. Goodbye.